Come closer and listen carefully. There are stories that linger in the shadows, tales whispered behind closed doors, secrets buried deep beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. These are the stories that grip us, that make the hair on the back of our necks stand on end, not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of the chilling reality of human nature, the tangled webs of relationships, and the devastating impact of truths left unspoken for too long. Tonight, I want to share one such story with you. A story that began with an unexpected inheritance and unraveled into a labyrinth of family secrets, resentment, and a shocking final act. Our central figure in this unfolding drama is a woman named Eleanor. By all accounts, Eleanor led a life that could be described as ordinary, perhaps even a little subdued. In her late 30s, she worked as a librarian in a quiet town nestled amidst rolling hills, a place where gossip traveled slowly but surely, and the rhythm of life was generally predictable. Eleanor was not someone who courted attention. She preferred the company of books, the hushed silence of the library stacks offering a sanctuary from the occasional storms of life. She had a gentle demeanor, a thoughtful gaze, and a quiet strength that often went unnoticed by those around her. Eleanor's life had its share of quiet joys and unspoken sorrows. Her relationship with her mother, Beatrice, had always been complicated. Not overtly hostile, but marked by a certain distance, a lack of the warmth and effortless connection that Eleanor sometimes observed in other mother-daughter pairs. Beatrice was a woman who carried a perpetual air of dissatisfaction, a subtle resentment that seemed to permeate her interactions, not just with Eleanor, but with the world at large. Eleanor had long ago learned to navigate these undercurrents, to offer her mother unwavering support without expecting much emotional reciprocity in return. Into this somewhat strained dynamic stepped Arthur, Beatrice's second husband and Eleanor's stepfather. Arthur was a man of quiet means, having built a successful small business over the years. He was the antithesis of Beatrice in many ways, jovial, generous, and possessing a seemingly endless well of patience. Arthur had come into Eleanor's life when she was in her early teens, a time of vulnerability and transition. He had offered a steady presence, a kind word, and a fatherly affection that Eleanor had unknowingly yearned for. Their bond, though never explicitly stated, was a source of quiet comfort for Eleanor, a silent understanding that transcended the often tense atmosphere of the household. Beatrice, while accepting of Arthur's presence, never seemed to fully embrace him, or perhaps anyone for that matter. Her interactions with him were polite but perfunctory, lacking any real intimacy or shared joy. It was as if she tolerated his presence rather than cherished it. Eleanor often wondered about the nature of their relationship, the invisible walls that seemed to exist between them. Were they truly happy, or was their marriage a matter of convenience, a shield against loneliness? These were questions Eleanor never dared to ask, sensing the fragility beneath the surface. Life continued in this predictable pattern for many years. Eleanor immersed herself in her work, finding solace in the world of literature. Beatrice maintained her air of quiet discontent, and Arthur remained the steady, affable presence in their lives. Eleanor occasionally had fleeting thoughts about the future, about what would happen as they all grew older, but these thoughts were usually vague and quickly dismissed. She could not have imagined the seismic shift that was about to occur, the event that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of their lives and expose the long-hidden fault lines beneath. It happened on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Eleanor received a phone call, the kind that instantly chills you to the bone. Arthur had passed away unexpectedly in his sleep. The news hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Despite the somewhat distant nature of their family dynamic, her affection for Arthur was deep and genuine. He had been a constant in her life for so long, a silent pillar of support. The grief was sharp and immediate, a painful void opening up in her familiar world. Beatrice's reaction was muted. There were tears, of course, and a visible display of mourning, but something felt off to Eleanor. It was as if Beatrice was playing a role, going through the motions of grief without truly feeling its visceral sting. Eleanor tried to offer comfort, but her mother seemed distant, preoccupied with practicalities rather than overwhelmed by loss. This subtle disconnect did not go unnoticed by Eleanor, planting a tiny seed of unease in her already troubled heart. The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, well-meaning condolences from friends and acquaintances, and the somber task of sorting through Arthur's belongings. It was during this process that the first unexpected revelation came to light. Arthur had left behind a will, a document that would irrevocably alter the lives of both Eleanor and Beatrice. The reading of the will was a tense affair. Eleanor and Beatrice sat in the lawyer's office, the heavy silence punctuated only by the rustling of papers. The lawyer, a man with a serious demeanor and a practiced air of impartiality, began to read the document. As he spoke, Eleanor listened intently, her mind reeling with a mixture of grief and apprehension. She expected that Arthur's estate would be divided between Beatrice and herself, perhaps with some provisions for other family members or charities. What she heard instead sent a shockwave through her entire being. According to the will, Arthur had left his entire estate, his house, his business, his investments, everything, to Eleanor. Her name was the sole beneficiary. Beatrice was not mentioned at all. The silence in the room after the lawyer finished reading was deafening. Eleanor stared at the lawyer, her mind struggling to comprehend the words she had just heard. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie, not her own life. She glanced at her mother, whose face was a mask of disbelief and a dawning fury that Eleanor had never witnessed before. "There must be some mistake," Beatrice finally said, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and anger. "This can't be right. I was his wife." The lawyer calmly reiterated the contents of the will, confirming that there was no error. Arthur's wishes were clear and legally binding. Eleanor sat there, feeling a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, guilt, and a growing sense of dread. Why would Arthur do this? Why would he leave everything to her and nothing to his wife of so many years? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and deeply unsettling. This unexpected inheritance was not a blessing. It was a bombshell that had just detonated in Eleanor's life, shattering the fragile peace and exposing a dark undercurrent that she had never suspected. The implications were immense, not just financially, but for the already strained relationship with her mother. Eleanor knew in that moment that her life would never be the same. The mystery of Arthur's will was just the beginning, the first breadcrumb on a path that promised to lead to far more disturbing revelations. The comfortable predictability of her existence had vanished, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty and the ominous feeling that she had stumbled into a story far more complex and sinister than she could ever have imagined. And as she looked at her mother's face, contorted with rage and betrayal, Eleanor knew that the fallout from this inheritance would be explosive, forever altering the landscape of their family and perhaps even their lives. The quiet librarian had unknowingly become the central figure in a drama where the stakes were higher than she could possibly fathom. The inheritance was not a gift. It was a burden, a secret wrapped in legal paper, waiting to be unraveled, with consequences that could be devastating. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was chaotic, to say the least. Beatrice was beside herself, her initial shock quickly morphing into a furious resentment directed squarely at Eleanor. Accusations flew, harsh words were exchanged, and the already fragile bond between mother and daughter seemed to snap completely. Beatrice couldn't comprehend why Arthur would have made such a decision. Had Eleanor somehow manipulated him? Had she turned him against his own wife? The accusations, though baseless and fueled by raw emotion, hung heavy in the air, creating an almost palpable wall of animosity between them. Eleanor, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events and deeply hurt by her mother's accusations, tried to reason with Beatrice, to understand Arthur's motivations herself. But her attempts were met with a wall of anger and disbelief. Beatrice refused to listen, convinced that Eleanor was somehow complicit in this perceived betrayal. The house, once a place of quiet routine, now echoed with bitter arguments and icy silences. The weight of the inheritance felt less like a gift and more like a curse, driving a wedge between the only family Eleanor had ever known. Amidst the emotional turmoil, Eleanor found herself poring over Arthur's belongings, searching for any clue, any explanation that might shed light on his baffling decision. She went through his papers, his journals, his old photographs, hoping to find a hidden message, a secret that would make sense of it all. It was a painstaking process, each object a reminder of the man who had been a steady presence in her life for so long, and now whose final act had thrown everything into disarray. Days turned into weeks, and the initial shock began to settle into a gnawing unease. Eleanor moved into Arthur's house, the house that now legally belonged to her, a place filled with his memories but also heavy with the absence of his familiar presence. Beatrice had moved out, unable to bear the thought of living under the same roof as Eleanor, the woman she now saw as a usurper. Their communication was reduced to terse, infrequent phone calls, filled with unspoken resentments and lingering accusations. It was during one of her solitary evenings in Arthur's study, surrounded by his books and papers, that Eleanor stumbled upon something that made her heart skip a beat. Tucked away in a locked drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old documents, was a small, leather-bound diary. The lock was simple, easily forced, and Eleanor found herself hesitating for only a moment before deciding to open it. She felt like she was intruding on a private space, but the burning need to understand Arthur's actions outweighed her reservations. The diary was old, the pages yellowed with age. The entries were sporadic at first, dating back many years, filled with the mundane details of daily life, business dealings, weather reports, casual observations. But as Eleanor continued to read, she noticed a shift in tone, a growing undercurrent of anxiety and sadness that began to permeate Arthur's writing. The entries became more frequent, more introspective, revealing a side of Arthur that Eleanor had never seen. He wrote of feeling increasingly isolated, of a growing distance between himself and Beatrice. He hinted at disagreements, at unspoken resentments that had festered over the years, eroding the foundation of their marriage. There were veiled references to Beatrice's unhappiness, her constant criticism, and a sense of being emotionally abandoned in his own home. These entries painted a picture of a relationship far removed from the polite facade they had presented to the world. But it was a later entry, dated just a few months before his death, that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. In it, Arthur wrote of a long-held secret, a truth that had haunted him for years, and that he felt he could no longer bear to keep hidden. He didn't explicitly state what the secret was, but he wrote of its potential to devastate lives and to shatter the very foundations of their family. He expressed a deep fear of the truth coming to light and a desperate desire to protect someone from its fallout. The entry ended abruptly mid-sentence, as if he had been interrupted. Eleanor stared at the unfinished words, her mind racing. What secret could Arthur have been referring to? What devastating truth had he carried with him for so long? And more importantly, how did this secret relate to his decision to leave his entire estate to her? Suddenly, Beatrice's fury and resentment took on a new dimension. Could her anger be more than just about the money? Could she know something about this secret? Had Arthur's will been a deliberate act, not of affection for Eleanor, but of retribution or protection related to this hidden truth? As Eleanor delved deeper into Arthur's diary, piecing together fragmented thoughts and veiled illusions, she began to uncover other unsettling details. There were mentions of Eleanor's father, who had passed away when she was very young. Arthur's entries hinted at a complex relationship between him and Eleanor's father, a relationship that went beyond mere acquaintance. There were cryptic references to a shared past, to decisions made and paths diverged. One entry in particular caught Eleanor's eye. It was dated many years ago, around the time Beatrice and Arthur had first started their relationship. Arthur wrote of Beatrice confiding in him about her life before she met Eleanor's father, a period of time that she had always kept shrouded in secrecy. He mentioned a past relationship, a man who had seemingly disappeared from her life under mysterious circumstances. Arthur's tone in this entry was troubled, as if this revelation had deeply disturbed him. Could this be the key? Could Arthur's secret be connected to Beatrice's past? And how did Eleanor's father fit into this intricate puzzle? The more Eleanor read, the more questions arose, each one more perplexing than the last. The comfortable narrative of her life was crumbling, revealing a hidden history filled with secrets, unspoken tensions, and perhaps even darker elements. The inheritance, initially perceived as an unexpected windfall, now felt like a poisoned chalice, forcing Eleanor to confront a past she never knew existed. She realized that Arthur's will was not an end, but a beginning, a catalyst that had set in motion a chain of events that would inevitably lead to the uncovering of long-buried truths. And as she held the worn leather diary in her hands, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering something that would change everything she thought she knew about her family and her own life. The secrets were beginning to surface, like dark shapes rising from the depths, and Eleanor knew that she had to follow them, no matter how treacherous the path ahead might be. The comfortable silence of the library seemed a distant memory, replaced by the unsettling whisper of hidden truths waiting to be revealed. Driven by the cryptic entries in Arthur's diary, Eleanor began to investigate the fragments of the past that had been hinted at. She started by looking into her own father's history, something Beatrice had always been reluctant to discuss. Eleanor had few memories of him, just vague impressions of a kind, gentle man who had been taken from her too soon. Beatrice had always painted a simple picture of his life and death, a narrative that Eleanor had never questioned, until now. Through old family photos and public records, Eleanor managed to piece together a more detailed picture of her father's life. He had been a local businessman, well respected in the community. There were no apparent scandals or hidden secrets in his past. However, as Eleanor dug deeper, she found a few connections to Arthur that Beatrice had never mentioned. It turned out that her father and Arthur had been business partners for a brief period, a venture that had ended abruptly many years before Eleanor was born. The details were scarce, but the fact that Beatrice had never mentioned this connection struck Eleanor as odd. Meanwhile, Eleanor also started looking into Beatrice's past, the mysterious relationship that Arthur had alluded to in his diary. This proved to be more challenging, as Beatrice had always been fiercely private about her life before she met Eleanor's father. There were no old friends or relatives in town that Eleanor knew of who might shed some light on this period. It was as if Beatrice had deliberately erased that chapter of her life. However, Eleanor remembered a few old photographs tucked away in a dusty album, pictures of a younger Beatrice with a man Eleanor didn't recognize. She decided to show these photos to a distant relative of Arthur's, someone who had known Beatrice and Arthur for many years. The relative studied the photos carefully and, after a moment of contemplation, identified the man as someone named Julian, whom Beatrice had been involved with before she met Eleanor's father. The relative recalled that the relationship had ended suddenly and under somewhat mysterious circumstances, with Julian leaving town without a trace. Armed with this new information, Eleanor felt a sense of momentum. She started searching for any record of Julian, hoping to uncover the truth behind his disappearance and its possible connection to Arthur's secret. It was a painstaking process, involving countless hours spent poring over old newspapers, online databases, and any other resource she could find. Then a breakthrough. Eleanor found a small, almost overlooked article in a local newspaper from decades ago, reporting on the disappearance of a man named Julian Thorne. The details were sparse, but it mentioned that Thorne had been involved in a dispute with a local businessman around the time of his disappearance. The name of the businessman? Eleanor's father. A cold wave of realization washed over Eleanor. Could her father have been involved in Julian's disappearance? And if so, did Arthur know about it? Was this the devastating secret that Arthur had alluded to in his diary? Suddenly, Arthur's will made a chilling kind of sense. If Arthur knew something incriminating about Eleanor's father, something that involved Beatrice's former lover, could he have left his estate to Eleanor as a way of righting a past wrong? Or perhaps even as a form of protection? But protection from what? Or from whom? Eleanor decided to confront Beatrice. The tension between them had remained palpable, a constant undercurrent of anger and resentment. But Eleanor knew she needed answers, no matter how difficult the conversation might be. She went to the small apartment Beatrice had rented, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The confrontation was explosive. When Eleanor presented the newspaper article and asked Beatrice about Julian Thorne, her mother's composure finally shattered. Beatrice initially denied knowing anything, but as Eleanor pressed further, her denials crumbled, replaced by a torrent of tears and a confession that stunned Eleanor to her core. Beatrice revealed that she and Julian had been deeply in love, but their relationship had been vehemently opposed by her family. Eleanor's father, who was a close friend of Beatrice's family at the time, had also played a role in their separation, believing that Julian was not a suitable match for her. According to Beatrice, her father had used his influence and connections to drive Julian out of town, effectively ending their relationship. But then, Beatrice revealed the truly shocking part of the story. She confessed that, shortly after Julian's disappearance, she had discovered she was pregnant with his child. Desperate and alone, she had turned to Eleanor's father for help. He had agreed to marry her and raise the child as his own, on the condition that she never spoke of Julian again. That child was Eleanor. Eleanor reeled from the revelation. Her entire life had been a lie. The man she had known as her father was not her biological father. Her mother had carried the secret for decades, a secret that had shaped the course of all their lives. But the revelations didn't end there. Beatrice then confessed that Arthur had known the truth about Eleanor's parentage for many years. He had discovered it accidentally, through an old letter he had found among Beatrice's belongings. Beatrice admitted that this knowledge had created a significant rift in her marriage with Arthur. He had been deeply troubled by the deception and the role Eleanor's, non-biological, father had played in Julian's disappearance. And then, Beatrice revealed the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle. She confessed that, years later, Arthur had confided in her that he had learned the truth about what had really happened to Julian Thorne. According to Arthur, Eleanor's father had not just driven Julian out of town. He had been directly responsible for his death, in a fit of rage during a heated confrontation. Arthur had kept this horrifying secret to protect Beatrice and Eleanor, but it had weighed heavily on his conscience for years. Eleanor stood there, numb with shock. The man she had mourned as her father was a murderer. Her stepfather had carried this terrible burden in silence, and her own existence was the result of a lie built upon tragedy and deceit. Suddenly, Arthur's will made perfect, albeit tragic, sense. He had left everything to Eleanor, his way of acknowledging the truth, of ensuring her financial security, and perhaps as a silent condemnation of Beatrice and the man she had married. It was a final act that spoke volumes, a posthumous revelation that had shattered Eleanor's world. The secrets had been unearthed, but the truth was far more devastating than Eleanor could have ever imagined. The comfortable life she thought she had known was an illusion, built on a foundation of lies and hidden crimes. Now, she was left to grapple with the weight of these shocking revelations, to confront the dark legacy of her past, and to decide what to do with the terrible truths that had been thrust upon her. The climax of the story had arrived, and the revelations were more earth-shattering than anyone could have foreseen. The quiet librarian was now at the center of a family tragedy far more complex and sinister than the pages of any book she had ever read. In the immediate aftermath of Beatrice's confession, Eleanor felt a profound sense of disorientation. The foundations of her identity had been irrevocably shaken. The man she had grieved as her father was now revealed to be a killer, a man capable of a violent act that had shaped the course of so many lives. Her stepfather, Arthur, had carried the burden of this knowledge for years, his final act a silent testament to the devastating truth. And her own existence was rooted in a secret, born from a love story tragically cut short and a subsequent deception. The weight of these revelations was almost unbearable. Eleanor spent the following days in a state of shock, trying to process the enormity of what she had learned. The quiet solitude of Arthur's house, once a refuge, now felt heavy with the echoes of long-held secrets and unspoken grief. Beatrice, consumed by guilt and remorse, offered Eleanor no easy answers or comfort. Their relationship, already strained, was now fractured beyond recognition. The shared history they thought they had possessed was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative that had crumbled under the weight of the truth. Eleanor found herself grappling with difficult questions. What was she supposed to do with this devastating knowledge? Should she reveal the truth about her non-biological father's past, potentially tarnishing his memory and causing further pain to others? What about Beatrice, who had lived with this secret for so long? And what about Arthur's decision to keep the truth hidden until his death? After much soul-searching, Eleanor made a difficult decision. She realized that revealing the full truth about the decades-old crime would likely serve no purpose other than to cause further pain and disruption. The people involved were long gone, and dredging up the past would not bring Julian Thorne back. She decided to keep the darkest aspects of the story to herself, a heavy secret to bear, but one that she felt was necessary to protect the fragile remnants of her family and the memory of the man she had believed to be her father. However, she could not ignore the truth of her parentage. She needed to reconcile with the fact that Julian Thorne was her biological father, a man whose life had been tragically cut short. She began to research him, trying to learn more about who he was, the life he had lived, and the dreams he might have had. It was a way for Eleanor to connect with a part of her identity that had been hidden from her for so long. As for the inheritance, Eleanor decided to use it in a way that honored Arthur's memory, perhaps by supporting a cause that was important to him. She also ensured that Beatrice was financially secure, despite the resentment and pain that lingered between them. Eleanor understood that her mother had been a victim of circumstance in many ways, caught in a web of secrets and lies that had ultimately shaped her life. The resolution of this story is not one of neat closure or happy endings. The revelations have left deep scars, and the relationships between the characters have been irrevocably altered. Eleanor is left to navigate a new reality, one where the past casts a long shadow over the present. She carries the weight of her true parentage, the knowledge of a hidden crime, and the complex legacy left behind by Arthur's unexpected will. There is a sense of lingering sadness, a poignant reminder of the destructive power of secrets and the enduring impact of past actions. The story serves as a testament to the fact that families, beneath their seemingly normal exteriors, can harbor dark truths that can unravel generations of carefully constructed lives. Eleanor's journey is one of coming to terms with a reality far more complex and tragic than she ever imagined. She has lost the comfortable illusion of her past but has gained a deeper, albeit painful, understanding of the forces that shaped her life. The inheritance was not just money and property. It was a key that unlocked a Pandora's box of secrets, forcing Eleanor to confront the truth about her family and, ultimately, about herself. Life in the quiet town would likely continue, but for Eleanor, everything had changed. She would forever carry the knowledge of the secrets that lay buried beneath the surface of her ordinary life, a constant reminder of the dramatic and mysterious events that unfolded after her stepfather left everything to her, and not her mother. The story ends not with a definitive conclusion, but with the quiet resilience of a woman forced to redefine her past and navigate a future shaped by shocking revelations. Thank you for listening to this story. If you found it gripping and thought-provoking, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more tales of mystery, drama, and the hidden truths within families, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. We delve into the shadows to bring you the stories that stay with you long after they're over. Your support means the world to us, and we appreciate you being a part of our community. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most shocking secrets are hidden closest to home.